This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual student chapter webinar that we're doing in conjunction with Kiewit, titled Recruiting Tips and Tricks. We're grateful that you all were able to join us. This is a topic that has come up as a topic of interest for our student members. So we're really happy that we're able to have this presentation today. My name is Eddie Gonzalez. I'm a program manager here at the Society of American Military Engineers, where I get to work on providing these kinds of programs to our student members. Before we jump into the webinar, I did want to put a plug in for our plans for the annual meeting that we're holding in May, our Joint Engineering Training Conference. It is going to be a virtual conference, and this year we're hoping to get more student participation. So we're working with our young professionals community of interest to plan an orientation to the virtual platform for student members. And we're also planning a little networking evening reception after one of the day's virtual programs. So a lot more information to come. Please stay tuned for the newsletter that'll come out from the College Outreach Community of Interest for more details on that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Thad Tababin, who's going to introduce our speakers. He is our host with Kiewit and has been working with us on setting up this whole series. So take it away, Thad.
Great. Thanks, Eddie. Really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for jumping on. This is our third installment of our series of student member webinar, Building the Foundation of Professional Skills. And if you hadn't had an opportunity to listen to the first two, please do. We had Learning to Lead During the Crisis, and then we had innovative thinking, and then we're wrapping it up this go around with resume writing and interviewing skills. So we've got two excellent presenters for you today. We have Metta, who she's been in the human resources industries, talent development industry for 25 plus years. Kiewit was very fortunate enough to have her come aboard with us just about a year ago, or it might have been six to 12 months ago. And then we've got Rick Chapman, who is a design engineer director for us. Metta resides out in sunny California, and Rick's in Seattle. So the time that they've got going on right now is a little bit after 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I guess. So appreciate you guys making time to do this. We're really excited. I wish that I would have had these two back when I was going through school to, brush me up on some interviewing skills, resume writing, because being exposed to them and seeing how they mentor some of our young engineers, it really, it shows you what's available out there. So please ask questions, dig in, and hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I'll let you take it away.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Thad, and thanks, Eddie. All right, so we're having Eddie drive this presentation. If you go to the next slide on the agenda piece. Okay, so we'll cover resume writing tips. We'll keep it very simple, and this is from my perspective and what I felt as a recruiter. Been doing this for a long time. What I look for. You could go on Google. You could search a lot of this information, tons of information at the palms of your fingertips. But this is where I feel as a recruiter that you could get more personal information from me and what I look for. Then tips on how to do on job interviewing when I as a recruiter speak to a candidate or prospects. And then Rick Chapman's our manager, and he'll talk about tips when you interview with a manager, what they look for and certain signs and certain responses. Then at the end, every one of us, I guarantee you will encounter some kind of question from a company that you feel uncomfortable. You don't want to respond to it, or you feel like, is that a right thing to ask? And what do you do? What if they could lose your chance of getting a job? So I'll walk you through and how we could be able to help you address some of those uncomfortable questions or inappropriate or unnecessary questions not work related. All right, next slide. Hey, Eddie. There we go. Just a quick introduction. That had pretty much identified my background, and I've been with Kiewit going on 12 months. I have significant years of experience. I am based here in Los Angeles area. The closest office for me for Kiewit is about 13 miles away, but 13 miles is like a whole hour and 15 minutes just to get down to that office. So I am virtual. I travel quite a bit to support the Kiewit Infrastructure Engineering District, and my corporate home district is in Omaha and Kansas City. I am originally from the East Coast. I see some of you are from University of Maryland or the Maryland location. So I went to George Mason and I got my master's from American University. And then I came out to the West Coast and been here pretty much since I've graduated school. And my focus is specifically on the engineering side of the market. I've been doing it right out of college. I have 2 kids and I can totally relate and understand how it's like for those who are in the high school years or entering college. My daughter is 17 and she's actually an intern at Kiewit as well. And so I could share some of her situation that could relate to your situation when she had to put her resume together when she had to interview. Rick is on the call here. Rick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rick Chapman. I'm a design area manager for Kiewit, and I work within our Kiewit engineering group, which is the engineering arm of our construction company. I got about 30 years of experience, a little over 30 years. I graduated from the University of Washington and joined Kiewit just a couple of years ago. My history is working with design engineering firms, some of the larger engineering firms in North America, but I pretty much consistently worked on design build projects over my career, and so had a lot of interaction with construction companies and really enjoyed that. And ultimately, a couple of years ago, decided to make the switch to a construction company and really enjoying that. I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different places and move around and see a lot of the western half of the country, at least. And even had a project, Metta and I both worked out in Guam for a while. So known Metta a long time. You can see there that one of my things that I really like to do is go fishing, and that's about a 30-pound salmon that I caught a while back. And now I've got my daughter into it, so she's out catching salmon with me as well. But I like hiking, golf, and all kinds of sporting events. So a little bit about me.
Fantastic. All right, next slide. Okay, resume writing tips. So this is like I said, this is my list of items that I feel that I look for talent at the level of a senior high school or a high school student or college students, right? You might feel, what do you have that you can put on a resume? Some of you may have not worked at all, or some of you have done non-paid job, and do you list that? So I'm going to list top 10 items. Like I said, you could research and go on Google and find tons of information. But these are the ones that I look at when I receive resumes from individuals who are in this age range or years of experience. Okay, next slide. Okay, top 10 resume writing tips. First of all, I like I mentioned to you, my daughter she's currently interning at Kiewit now. I had her go and pull resume samples of other students who are high school and in college, graduating, recent graduates with no experience. Look at those samples. It helps put a template or guideline together. And then I told her, I said, okay, put an outline together of any formal paid work experience or non-paid work experience, because she's like, I haven't gotten paid. This is be my first job. I said, okay, but you have worked. I said, so like your informal work experiences like babysitting, pet sitting, could be lawn mowing, shoveling snow, anything else you've done, that you feel that it builds your character. So that's what I'm trying to look at as a recruiter. I want to be able to see your formal and informal work experience that it demonstrates or displays your skills and your reliability as a future employee at a corporation. Number 3, display skills that show you have character, work ethic, skills. Include skills related to the jobs for which you are applying. For example, if you're applying for an intern role as a civil engineer and you have not had that experience interning or ever done anything like that, well, look at some of your prior experience in terms of like leadership, classes, clubs, after-school program, anything that could emphasize your technical, your mathematical, your strategic skills. Use classes that you're taking, your AP classes. You could note some of those things that will describe or be a description of what you do. Use action verbs, right? So number 5, I put on your description, like use action verb to describe your experience. And these action verbs basically, it portrays your leadership, it portrays your accomplishment, it portrays your dynamic way of, when people read a resume, we could see a person's character through the way they write, through the verbiage, the verbs they use. So action words like organize, led, calculated, taught, served, trained, tutor, wrote, research, you created, you inventory, those are action verbs. So those are things that I do when it pops out to me. And going down to like number 7, keep it short. So for somebody who does not have significant years of experience, I tell those individuals that keep it at 1 page. Ideally, 1 page is the best. But when you start becoming more experienced, I see people will send me 3 pages, 5 pages, sometimes even 15 pages, because they are including all their academic, their PhD, their scholars, publication, which is fine. But keep it, if you could, ideally 1 to 2 pages. 1 is perfect for somebody who's in a high school graduate or college that's applying for a job. And 8 standard sections to include. So this is pretty typical, your name, contact, make sure you put your contact. People will forget to put their contact information on there. Your education, date graduating, your GPA, because it does make a difference to us when we're hiring recent high school, college graduates. Your objective, what is your objective? What do you want to do? Or your qualifications, what do you qualify for? And then of course, listing your experience. Proofread. People fail to do that. Proofread your draft, have others look at it, ask your guidance counselor, your parents, your teacher to critique your resume. Don't be shy. The better you have somebody who you feel is really critical, ask that person. That's the person you should have when review your resume. And 10. So because you don't have a lot of experience, your resume could speak about you, but a cover letter is always best. If you couldn't cover a letter that talks about what you're trying to do, use that opportunity to sell yourself. So these are the top things that I would recommend for individuals who are high school or college graduates that doesn't have significant years of experience. Okay, next example, next slide. So I pulled an example of a student, a resume I found online that I thought was pretty well, formulated, put together. And as Eddie said, that you'll get a copy of this deck slide. So I include this so you can see the format, the structure, 1 page, how clean it is, and how short and crisp, and how it speaks about some of the experience that he doesn't have, that is all paid. He has 1, but then a lot of it, some is volunteer work. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, go on to the next one. So quick tips to job interviewing. All right, so we have a small audience, which is good because it gives us, it's a little more intimate, so we could be able to see all of your responses. And I want you to use the chat box there to answer. So what I'm going to ask you, a very simple question. I'd like everyone to just kind of put your response in there, keep it short, to rock your next job interview, right? You really want to do well. Tell me, what tips would you give yourself to succeed? So you could just key that in there into the chat box. So tell me, what tips would you give yourself to succeed? I see 2 good responses. Anyone else? These are really, really good responses. Rick, this is going to be great for you because everything they've said is based on what you and I talked about.
Exactly. We're not even going to have to go through my presentation.
This is awesome. I love it. I love the responses you have provided, especially research the company. And somebody says, you know, prepare for your interview, practice. I mean, that's really good. That's so true. We should never take it for granted. We should always be prepared. Do your homework, do your research. And if you go to the next slide, please. All right. So job interview preparation, yes, be prepared. Research. Somebody actually added that on there. Art Lee did. Research companies, you know, project, ask about questions about that relates to functioning. Dixer wrote, you know, what interests you in a company and job? Do your research because that will mean a lot. So when you're speaking to a recruiter and you're not speaking to a manager, recruiters are usually the front line that contacts you. They are the one that you have to impress first. If you don't impress them, they're going to go back to the manager and say, oh, I don't recommend you speak to that individual. Had no interest, came unprepared, didn't even know what it was interviewing for, didn't even know who the company was. I mean, that's just sends the wrong message. So regardless who you're speaking to, do your homework. It doesn't take much at all. I mean, you easily could go to the company's website, LinkedIn, Indeed. You look up the size of the company, their revenue, what market they're in. When you go to Kiewit's site, you can see it gives you choices of our market, what type of jobs, what kind of project programs, work that we do. You could even go to Glassdoor and in Indeed and look at the company's review. So be very careful on this piece. I've had candidates quote me about Glassdoor, what they saw was written about a specific company. And okay, Glassdoor review is based on an individual's perspective. Just because somebody didn't have a good experience, it does not mean it's a reflection on the company. So that's why I said be very careful what you read and always have an open mind because you're reading from one perspective. But if you read the Glassdoor review, you could see hundreds of other perspectives that could be fantastic, right? So it's no different from going to Yelp. If you go to a restaurant, I mean, a lot of times you see a 5-star and you might not agree when you go and you're like, this is definitely not a 5-star restaurant. So, and careful how you quote that information to the recruiter or the manager because it could, this is our company or this is the company you're interviewing with. It could send a really negative message if you come back with like, well, I heard that somebody posts on there that your company's culture is this, and not very positive. So be careful what you say. There's always ways how you can frame your question. All right, so next bullet, I said, you've been selected to interview, okay? So you always wanna ask them, is this a video in-person interview? Now with COVID, everything's on video, so but ask, don't assume. And ask, what's the dress attire? What does the company prefer? What would you recommend? How should I dress? Should I wear a suit even as in a video? And the recruiters will tell you, they'll tell you it's very business casual, or when you come to the office, they will tell you like, yeah, I would recommend you definitely wear a jacket, blazer, wear a tie. Ask them who you're interviewing with. And when you find out who you're interviewing with, you could be able to look up in LinkedIn profile on that individual. And I'll show you in the next one a little bit about careful how you look up someone's profile. So the job interview is very important that you come prepared, right? So these are the things that you could do, but ask the recruiter all this stuff so you have it ready to go when you finally officially are interviewing with a manager. Eddie, can you go to the next slide? I want to show about LinkedIn. All right, so I pulled this profile up of a specific individual. I won't mention the person's name, and it's just a snapshot of where they work and their education. And next slide, Eddie. So I've had people pull up my profile and would come back and say things like, oh, I noticed that, you graduated from, let's say this individual, let's say, I noticed you graduated from University of Washington about 33 years ago. My gosh, as the manager, he'd be like, why were you looking at my profile? Who cares? I graduated 33 years ago. It's a reflection of my age. Why would you quote that? Go to the next slide. And this is the way I would like, if you really want to reference their, their education, where they went to school, it's better that you say something like, oh, I noticed you went to that University of Washington. I've been accepted. Can you tell me a little bit about their engineering program? Don't say, oh, can you tell me about the engineering program back then 30-something years ago? So Try to omit or anything that reflects anyone's age, gender, religion, profiles in any way. Don't, keep any personal references out, So be very, when you use LinkedIn, you kind of quote something to an interviewing manager, recruiter, be very careful what you say. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, first impression, of course, the day interview, never be late. I would recommend that if you're not familiar, drive out there the day before, ask if there's parking, so you don't want to rush and can't find a parking spot or something. Bring 3 to 5 copies of your resumes. Always be ready. They may already have it, but in case they say we didn't get a copy of your resume. Oh, so sorry. Here you go. Always bring a notepad and pen. Even if you don't write anything, always come prepared and bring a notepad and pen. Have a conversation. One of the things that I always tell people, be human. You got to talk. I've had people interview with me would not say a word. So it's very important that when you come to an interview, this is the opportunity for you to challenge the interview with tough questions. It's not only the employer is going to challenge you, but you should come prepared with tough questions. Because the employer wants to judge how you handle certain questions under pressure. But for you as the candidate, you want to use this opportunity to demonstrate your intelligence and communication skills, your ability to ask, thoughtful questions. And Rick is going to provide a couple examples with you with his slides and what he looks for, what kind of questions, that he would expect for you to ask. Okay. And I always tell people, there's certain things that you do and you do not ask. So always be honest. If you lie and you secure the position despite your honesty, your future at that company will be in jeopardy once the truth comes out. Okay. So for example, don't lie if you were laid off or you were fired from a previous job. The truth will likely come out before being hired, as companies conduct employment verifications nowadays, or someone will know someone's a small industry. Be open and confident, providing valid reason for any part of your employment history that you're not proud of. If you were terminated or fired, you could always use a softer phrase such as, I was let go, and then change the conversation and focus on your skills and the suitability for the job, that you're talking about. You could always bridge the gap by saying, I have references, I have letter of recommendation from my last employer. I know I was released, but here is something that will verify and test to my background, my work ethics. So be honest. Another warning item is I always tell people, don't ask what the rate of pay is. The hiring team will advise on the rate of pay. You're applying for the job, the opportunity to make your resume, your portfolio better, right? So don't ask. Don't ask about overtime, as you may feel is a willingness to work extra hours. The interviewer will nearly always note that you're asked about overtime, and they may doubt your determination to work efficiently during those regular hours. And why do you care? And then maybe that you might have some concern because you might have to work above and beyond. So any corporation, I will tell you, they always like people who work above and beyond. That's up to you. So when you ask about, do you have to work overtime, it could send a negative message. So be careful in that kind of question you ask. Follow-up interview. So 24 hours, after the interview, it's always a good idea to follow up, email the interviewer. If you have time, send a thank you card. But I do encourage you, send a thank you email. We interview tons of people, so it's always nice when I have somebody who stands out from the crowd. If we have 5 people interview and we narrow it down to 3 and you happen to be the top 3, we have a difficult time because we have 1 slot and you're the only person who sent a thank you. It speaks a lot. It speaks that you follow through. It speaks you're interested. It speaks about your character. So within 24 hours, send a follow-up email, thank you. And you can always ask the recruiter. They'll give you the contact information. Okay. All right, so let's go into the next slide. And I'm going to turn this over to Rick.
Thanks, Metta. I have to say I'm offended by the fact that you use my LinkedIn profile to point out the age of a person and how that can affect you. So before we go into the next slide, I just wanted to say, I'm in the engineering construction business, right? And so a lot of my examples are sort of focused around that. But you can apply the concept at least to any type of opportunity. And, please feel free to ask questions or comment in the chat. We're monitoring that. So if you have anything that you guys want to ask about, go ahead and do that as we move forward. And we're going to kind of practice that here on the first slide. So Eddie, if you go to the next slide. So in the chat, please type in your favorite color. There we go. Okay, so now I know you're all awake and that you know how to use the chat to ask questions. Go ahead, Eddie. You can go to the next slide. So you don't need to answer this question, but this is a question that you should keep in mind every time you're going in for an interview, because that's ultimately you want the job, right? And so the people that are, on the receiving end of what you're telling them, they're looking for someone to fill that position. And so you should know exactly why you want that job. And regardless of what the job is, make sure it's not because my mom and dad told me I needed to get one, or I need some money so I can go skiing on the weekends. Put a little thought into it and figure out exactly why you want that job. And, regardless of whether they even ask you that question, it should be kind of the theme for all the answers that you provide to them when they're asking, when they're interviewing you. So, put that down on paper, maybe, for you to kind of look at and understand and think about, what is it really I'm trying to accomplish here, and why do I want this job? Go ahead, Eddie, you can go to the next slide. So kind of a lot of what we're going to talk about here is going to be a little bit repetitive, and you guys really responded well to those initial questions, or the initial question that Metta had. So a lot of this might be sort of review, but go ahead and go to the next slide. So really, you want to understand what this company is all about. And again, I'm going to focus here a little bit on the engineering side, but when you're going in, understand what that company does. And, maybe it's a transit company or entity or agency. Maybe it's just an engineering company that you're looking to get, and again, I'm using engineering here as an example, but maybe it's a geotechnical engineering company or a traffic design company or a general civil structural, but really understand what it is that company does. Next slide. And then understand what markets they work in. Are they an energy company, a transportation company, a building company? Are they a service company? Do they have a specific product? So really understand what it is they do and how they do it and why they're doing it, right? They have a vision as well, and you should try to understand what that is. Next slide. And then figure out what it is exactly that the types of work they do, and get a little more specific than what I was talking about previously. So when I got out of school, I was kind of I was a civil engineer, but I was really into alignments and geometry and highways, and that's kind of where I focused, where I wanted to go to work. So when I was interviewing, I was asking about the types of jobs that they had, and or the types of projects that I might work on. So you can do the same thing, right? Figure out exactly what it is that the job is that they're asking, that you're interviewing for, and then what is your passion related to that. So when you're coming out of school and looking for that first job, think about what it is that you really like to do and how the job that they're looking for you to fill really meets with what your desires are and how you want to go about doing the job. And then actually, if there's a product, maybe a specific product or a specific project that you did some research on about that company, you can even ask a question about that and say, maybe would I be able to fit into something like that? And we'll actually get into that a little bit more. Next slide. And then this is kind of a real important one in a lot of markets, I guess, or a lot of businesses, but where do they do business? Kiewit really is focused on North America. That's where a predominant amount of our work is, but we have offices all over the place in North America, so US and Canada. But a lot of companies are international, and if you're seeking international work, I mean, that's a good thing to understand. Or if you're really tied to a certain location, you need to understand that as well. And maybe you, with that in mind, you look at a regional firm or a smaller local firm, because if you do work for a national or international firm, they may be looking for you, to answer a question about would you be willing to travel, or are you willing to relocate, or things like that. So, the type of company that they are and where they do business can be an important factor in what you want to, in the job ultimately that you want to have. Next slide. And then really understand what the role and the position of the job that you're interviewing for is. I mean, this is obviously super important to understand that, but when they talk about the role, a lot of times there's maybe some things that you want to clarify about that. So you can certainly ask some questions about the role. In a lot of cases, it sounds like you guys are either high school or coming out of college, and it's an entry-level position, but there's no reason that you can't, ask specific questions about the role, anything beyond, what they might have in the advertisement. Is there, say, field work, or is there travel? Things like that you can ask about the position, and it shows your interest in the position that you've got or that you're applying for. Again, I kind of mentioned talking about maybe some projects or products that they have and showing your interest in those. And again, they may ask you questions, but it's certainly no reason that you can't ask a question about, whether there's a position that you might fill in particular on a certain type of project. Again, geography, things like that related to that position. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, go one more. I kind of hit a couple of bullets there. And then one more, Eddie. And then this is another thing you specifically want to ask about. Yeah, you can stop right there is, where does this position lead, right? I mean, if it's an entry-level position, maybe you can figure out, it's relatively simple, I guess, in the engineering world to figure it out. We have engineer 1, engineer 2, project engineer, senior project engineer, project manager, and so forth. And maybe that's pretty simplified in a lot of different industries or businesses, but understand where you want to go. I mean, I think that's, in a lot of cases, people will ask you, well, what's your long-term goal? Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And, hopefully you don't want to be in that entry-level position 10 years down the road. So, think about where it is that you want to go ultimately with the job and the career. Ask about the steps if you don't understand what they are. And but in a lot of cases, they'll ask you about where you ultimately want to end up in the type of position that you want to end up. And then it's definitely safe to ask questions about, do they have training programs or rotational programs, and do they have formal mentoring and things like that? Because it certainly, leads them to understand your interest, again, in the position, in the company, in how you can advance, and it shows that you have some initiative and maybe want to move up throughout that company. So those are types of things that you can ask about the particular position and how you might advance at that company. Next slide. Okay, so these are some things that Metta already touched on a little bit, but you really want to make the interview conversational. It's really awkward on both sides. I've done a lot of interviews, and it can be awkward when you're either preaching to someone or vice versa. So as you're interviewing, make sure you're answering their questions thoroughly and thoughtfully and to the point, but be concise. You don't need to ramble on for long periods of time about a particular question that they've asked. But again, answer it thoroughly, but don't dwell on things that might not be specific to the question that they asked. And you want a little bit back and forth, right? So even when they ask a question, and go ahead and go to the next slide, Eddie, they may ask you a question like, what is your ideal job to work on? What would you like to do? Go to the next slide. The answer might be something like, well, I like to be able to be outside a little bit. And so I really like a job or a position where I can work both in the office, but also get out in the field and do some work. And so to make it conversational, go ahead to the next slide. You can follow that answer up with a question back to them. Go ahead, Eddie, to the next slide. And maybe the question you ask is, something to the effect of, hey, I noticed when I was, Eddie, next slide. Well, I'll hit the question that you could ask as Eddie works to advance that. But, you might have done some research on them and found that they recently won a project. So you might say, the fact that I like to work outside as well in the office, I noticed you guys won a job and it's a wastewater treatment plant. And I know that, I'm going to be on the job, or I'd like to be on the job to design it, but I also would like to go out in the field and do some maybe construction supervision or, do field work associated with that. So is that something that this position or that I might be able to fit in if I were in this position? So that allows you to get some back and forth between the interviewer and you, and it really makes it, easier, if you will, for both parties to kind of just have that conversation. It's just like I said, it can be really awkward if you're having a one-sided conversation. So see if you can make that, a good interviewer will work to facilitate that. But if you're able to facilitate that on your own, that even shows stronger skills on your part. Next slide. So really the biggest thing here is to be prepared. We talked a lot about understanding the company, understanding the position, maybe even understanding the person that's going to interview you, but be careful about that. You don't want to go into too much depth there. But if you understand all that, and somebody had responded early to, think about what questions you might get asked and practice the responses to those questions. If you're prepared, you understand the company, you're going to be more confident going into the interview. They're going to see that you're more confident and well prepared. That all bodes really well. And, it shows to them that you really want the job, that you understand about them, you understand the position and all that. But probably the biggest thing is, like I said, it provides confidence to you that you understand, about them, and they'll see that as you respond to the questions. Metta?
All right, thank you. Great information and great feedback. So hopefully everybody was able to take away from a manager's perspective. All right, our last section is covering interviewing questions companies should not ask. And I guarantee you all will approach this. I've had in my time where I've been asked certain questions, and how do you address it? How do you deal with this uncomfortableness? So Eddie, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I kind of want to put this into all your minds here, thoughts, and think about this. How do you answer questions like this? So there's two questions. And if you could go to the next slide. Where were you born? All right, the next one. What age are you? Right, so where are you born? What age are you? Why are they asking this? What does it have to do with your job to be an engineer or to be a programmer? What's the purpose of it? So Eddie, go to the next slide. Okay, so these are things that are off limits to employer. And I'm sure you learned through your academics, your school, and you've read enough about it. These are off limit questions. Anything that relates to your race, your age, religion, color, place of birth, disability, marital status, children. Why? It has nothing to do with your job. So these kind of questions when asked, how old are you? Where were you born? And it relates to those categories. So you could feel like, okay, how do I deal with this? Why are they asking? situations like this, I would say go ahead and answer the question directly. If you are comfortable providing the answer, just respond and move on to the next question. Remember though, some of these questions, when you give information is not related to the job, maybe giving details that impact negatively on you. But if you refuse to answer that question, I always tell people, my suggestion, I always tell candidates who are preparing is that, if you refuse to answer the question, I would save it for confrontational response that could be questions that are like very offensive or invasive. So save that confrontational situation if it's really bad and you just like, wow, okay, I really feel uncomfortable answering these questions, and you could say something like, that is a strange question. I haven't been asked that before in an interview. Why have you asked me that? So, determine what's appropriate and how you want to address it, right? Or another way, I always tell candidates is that, it's when a company asks a lot of inappropriate questions, it's not necessary, especially those questions that are related to Title VII that employers should know better. Sometimes maybe it's for you to consider that maybe this is not the right company, right? Why are they asking this? And the most effective, honestly, the most effective response is to not answer the inappropriate question directly, but determine the reason and intent behind it, right? So try to find out what the interviewer is really asking by rephrasing it or clarifying the question. So if they ask you about your age, maybe you could say, "Oh, I'm eligible to drive. I have a license. I'm age appropriate. So is that what you're asking me?" If they ask again, "No, I want to know what your age," and then you could say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you explain why?" And that's nothing wrong with it. It's all in your tone, it's all in your inflection. And then maybe the interviewer will be like, "Okay, I'm asking because I want to make sure that, by law, we can't allow you to work over a certain amount of hours. And also we can't allow you to be on a construction site because you're underage. That's why I'm asking." Well, okay, they prepped it that way. It's a little different. It's job related. So hopefully those suggestions help. Yes.
We got a question in the chat. Are they allowed to ask about citizenship if government contractor?
They have to tell you up front, and the job posting has to tell you that they are looking, that the job is a federally government contracting, and a U.S. citizenship, a U.S. Eligibility is required. So yes, they can ask, but it has to be business related, and you can ask them back on that. So like, "Oh, may I ask why you asked my citizenship? Is this a federal government contract, type of job?" And they'll be like, "Oh, no, it isn't." And I'll say, "Oh, well, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. I am eligible." That's what the answer you should really say is, "I am eligible to work in the U.S. and I can provide proof." That's all you say.
That's a good question, Art.
That's a very good question. How much were you paid in your last employment? The new law, so certain states have changed. It's not all states. Some states, California, Massachusetts, New York, I think New Jersey might be another one. Colorado's coming along. So not all state, and it's not federal, it's state regulated, and we cannot ask you what your last pay makes. But we could ask you, what are you seeking? What's your seeking rate? What ideally are you looking to, for this position? They can ask that, but they cannot ask, what's your last pay? So your last pay, you were a gardener making $19 an hour. What does that have to deal with a civil engineer? You're gonna pay me because I made 19, you're gonna pay me 19 again? So it has nothing. It's two different roles. That's a very good question. I like that one. Any other questions that you guys encounter or like some clarification? So this is great. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So hopefully this information was very valuable to you, and Eddie will share the deck slide, and Eddie, you're welcome to share my contact information. I'm happy to have any other further dialogue offline with an individual, or you have any questions you want to send to me, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, Metta, actually, I have a question. When you started your presentation, you mentioned discussing or asking questions of the recruiter. What if the position doesn't actually have a recruiter that you talk to? Is it the human resources or hiring manager, or who would you address those questions to?
Yeah, so sometimes every company is different, right? So some companies, the managers go directly to the candidates. I mean, ideally, it should be the recruiters that are reaching out to the candidates first to start the whole initial screening, initial contact, preparation, relationship building. So that's the person that we're working with. But in that situation, when that does happen, if the question is specifically HR related, you could ask the manager, and the manager would say like, oh, let me get back to you. I'll find out because I don't know the answer, but I'll get back to you. So let's say you ask the manager about, benefits, or you ask the manager, like, would the company reimburse me for transit, because some companies allow wage work reimbursement or something, and the manager might say, I have no idea. I'll get back to you. I'll definitely let you know. So yeah, definitely ask the individual. And I think a lot of corporations now are leaning to using recruiters to do a lot of their interviews, setting up dialogue about compensation, offers, all of that.
Okay, and I was active duty military, so I know the federal government, and I imagine all government, state is probably different. Or do you find that they're also using recruiters at this point?
Oh, they're starting to use a lot of recruiters. My previous employer before joining Kiewit was a big federal contractor, and they asked me, because a lot of their clients were the military, so they asked me to train some of their military recruiters how to source and find people using the technology that I was using. And so I see the government, Army specifically, was starting to recruit and hire a lot more recruiters to work directly for them, because it's a tough market. Things are changing. It's hard to find people.
It's a good market right now for engineering and science related degrees, I think, right? So
Absolutely.
on the call, remember that and continue working hard. Is there any more questions out there? Okay, well, I would definitely like to express my thanks to both our presenters today, Metta and Rick, and as well to Kiewit for this series that they've put on for our virtual student chapter. We will have another webinar in mid-April, and we'll hold off on any further ones in May because we would like to hopefully get some students to come to our virtual JETSI, as Eddie mentioned. So again, my thanks for everybody joining today. Eddie, do you have any closing comments?
No, I'm good. The recording will be posted on the College Outreach Community of Interest page for anybody that wants to highlight it to their student members. Thanks, everyone.
All right, great. Thanks again, guys. And we'll go ahead and sign off now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.